Formidable rocky mountains towered over the world, their peaks reaching as high as if they wanted to touch the sky. This place, known as Murim, was home to outstanding martial artists who lived and developed their art in these mountains. Once upon a time, the harmony of nature reigned here, and it seemed that peaceful and tranquil times were at hand. However, a shadow always lurks not far from the light, and this time evil began to grow in power. Three of the strongest and most experienced masters, known as the Aces, felt disgusted with the world and its pulsating energy. Unable to find a place in their hearts, they retreated deep into the mountains, hiding there for many years, waiting for the next epical moment. Many years have passed since then. Everything was so calm and peaceful, as if nothing could disturb the harmony of this world. But then, the demon of illusion Kampen Ak appeared, a spirit, the greatest fighter among martial artists. He felt an invisible threat and brought a boy here to these quiet lands. With his inner feelings, the demon was sure that the boy's fate was in danger, and he had to act. Among the majestic mountains and mysterious shadows, Samu Mel, a spirit of striking moonlight beauty, appeared. He stood in front of the child, his eyes radiating a thoughtful gleam. In a soft voice, he said that after going through so many trials, he was sure that this boy had the blood of a worthy master in his blood. Samumel was not alone in his thoughts. Next to him stood the divine eye, En Wu, the spirit of knowledge that comprehended all the secrets of the universe. He knew everything that could be imagined, and feeling the powerful energy in the little child, he suggested that Samumel stop his seclusion in the mountains and start raising a disciple. This is where our story begins. The absolute warrior. From the very beginning of his stay in the New World, the boy is overwhelmed by negative emotions. Adrenaline and fear compete in his heart. He is torn with anger from the inside because he cannot understand who they are, these mysterious masters, and whether they are really as cool as they want to seem. His thoughts rage like relentless arrows of fire, catching any opportunity to understand this mysterious and dangerous element. Running away from these old men, he comes to the same cliff again. In the mountain peaks, there is a stone with mysterious inscriptions. Its existence was not to warn random travelers, but only for him. On this stone were written words that inspire fear. Whoever leaves this holy place will have one of his organs cut off. His chest is filled with anger because he is convinced that his life has become the object of a cunning plan of terrible old men. They had proclaimed themselves as Murim ascendants, the most powerful spirits of this world. He was especially saddened by their three names, mysterious and masterful, the demon of illusions, Kampen Ak, a spirit that surpasses everyone in martial arts, the greatest moon-faced Samu Mel, a spirit whose beauty cannot be expressed in words, the divine eye Yundan Wu, a spirit of knowledge that knows all the secrets of the universe. The guy happened to find himself on the day when mysterious spirits decided to change his life forever. He is convinced that these so-called martial arts masters are ordinary charlatans who only commit huge crimes by kidnapping him and forcing him to work for them in inaccessible mountains. Cleaning, cooking, serving, his days are spent in constant torment like a servant, and they don't even show the slightest respect. On the other hand, he thought he was lucky to be alive at all. And here he is, standing in front of this stone, Seo Eun Gang, brave and determined, filled with a strong conviction that this time no one will stop him. Now I'll definitely escape from these half-dead monsters, he sighs. But no matter how confident his intentions were, 3 times he tried to escape, and each time these attempts were thwarted. But after the inscription on the stone, he is going to go back, because he realizes that he cannot escape. An incredible indignation burns in his soul. He cannot accept the fact that his life has come under the dark influence of these mysterious old men. After that, the boy suddenly felt a blow on his head with a dirty rag, and he could not understand why it hurt so much. Suddenly he heard loud shouts from the masters, demanding that he obey, give up his stupid ideas, and appear before them immediately. He was overcome with a feeling of hopelessness as he realized that he would be beaten again. With the characteristic scraping of the door, the boy entered the master's room, placing his hopes and dreams on the threshold. But instead of the usual order, the masters began a conversation on a completely different topic. They talked about his training, why he had been chosen as an apprentice, and which outstanding masters had brought him here. The boy, stunned by the unexpected conversation, was silent, not knowing how to respond. He didn't even have time to formulate his thoughts when he received a slap on the head for what they thought was insincerity. He tried to explain that he didn't want to be an apprentice, that he hadn't asked for the choice, but the masters wouldn't listen. For his rude answer, he received another beating because he was not grateful for such a merit. They talked about the terrible fate of students who were expelled but could not feel anything because all their 6 senses had been taken away. The boy was not comforted by their precious knowledge because he knew that he knew nothing yet. But the masters disagree. and their convincing arguments leave him no choice. The teachers were very surprised that they hadn't taught him anything, emphasizing studying, cleaning, washing, and cooking, despite the fact that the student already knew how to do all of this, and the teachers spent all day playing baduk. Seo Young-gang remained silent, afraid of another portion of pain for his opinion. His heart beat rapidly, and his thoughts froze as he imagined what his future would be like here. Unknown masters, great mountains, art that he did not yet understand, all of this coincided in one place. He decided that it was time to reveal all the cards and find out what awaited him as an apprentice to the masters. He did not realize that he had been kidnapped, but now it became clear to him that he had his own destiny, his own path, and he wanted to follow it to the end. The masters could not help but call him stupid, saying that his main teaching would be Mugan. It seemed that everything was spinning in the boy's head, but then everything instantly became clear before his eyes. He realized that he was between the great mountains where true masters are born. Here is his chance to learn the art of Mugan, which turns ordinary people into real warriors. Despite the fact that he was just kidnapped and no one told him about Mugan, he now knows that this is his destiny. And these old people, hermits in the mountains, turned out to be those masters. The teachers ended the secrets and revealed their real names to the students. Each name was spoken with a deep sense of mystery, and their impressive skills added to the mystery of the place. Before the boy stood the demon of illusion Kampen Ak, an incredibly skilled swordsman who had earned the fame of the god of the blade. The greatest moon-faced Samu Mel was a magical spirit of indescribable beauty. His face changed as if shadows and light were playing on his moonlit skin. He skillfully passed through the most difficult obstacles of life, becoming a master of hand-to-hand combat. Endan Wu, or Divine Eye, is a spirit that knows everything. He was once the leader of a mysterious organization that was shadowily intertwined with the world of masters. His wisdom and knowledge seemed limitless, and his eye penetrated to the very depths of the soul. For the boy, the names seemed like difficult puzzles. He decided to ask them to repeat them more slowly. This was supposed to make it easier to understand, but instead, the teachers, who looked wise and calm, suddenly turned into hostile madmen and began to quarrel with each other. It seemed that this quarrel would never end, and the boy began to feel afraid of what the future held for him with such unpredictable teachers. But as the situation escalated, their movements became quick, and their eyes shimmered with mystical fire. They furiously beat each other with superpowers that surpassed ordinary human perception. The boy was confused and frightened. Not understanding this magic, he could not stand aside. Summoning up his courage, he wedged himself between the rivals, trying to stop this quarrel that was growing with each passing second. 7 days passed, and for the boy, who had now become an apprentice to the masters, everything remained the same. His attempts to understand his new fate seemed futile. The masters kept him unconscious after the fight. Suddenly, regaining consciousness, the boy was given new tasks to do all the chores that had accumulated over the week. He felt angry, assuming that the masters had planned it this way to overwhelm him with work. But something strange happened. The constant blows that used to hurt didn't seem so painful anymore, but rather invigorating. The guy did not understand what was happening to his body, and surprisingly, he did not have any wounds, not even a single bruise. But after a month, like an endless circle of hell, something strange happened. The masters showed an unusual reaction to the boy. Their eyes were not directed at his mistakes or shortcomings, but only looked him over. The boy, who was used to their behavior, came to them after the wash. But this time everything was different. Feeling those mysterious glances again, he expected to hear a sharp shout for his negligence. But the answer was completely unexpected. The masters announced that the time had come for him to learn Mugan, a secret art about which he had only heard rumors. The boy did not believe the masters' words and was very surprised. It seemed suspicious to him, but the masters assured him that they had discussed everything and came to the conclusion that the boy needed to be taught as delicately as possible. Seo Young-gang couldn't believe his ears. He was finally going to be taught real Mugang. At first, he had no idea if the teachers were really skilled in Mugang, but now he believed in their true skill. He hoped to become a master himself. The boy discreetly took advantage of his joy and said that he understood everything. The teachers smiled and said they were waiting for him in the hut. And then the first lesson began, and the mentor was the demon of illusion, Kampen Pen Aik, a spirit who was known for his martial arts skills. He was nicknamed Bidong, or Pigwing, during a quarrel. It all started out quite unusually, but the masters were pleased that a student had finally appeared, and they were telling the truth about themselves and their skills. They assured the boy that his training would not disappoint him, and that he would become stronger after learning Mugang. They told him about the desert masters who live in the bosom of nature, and he had already heard about them. Now it seemed to him that becoming a blade god was an incredible opportunity. But then, he suddenly remembered Tang Soso, a girl from Sichuan province, and his heart beat faster. He wanted to visit her, but he was confused, not understanding why he suddenly remembered her. Perhaps it was a sign. As they walked to the main training ground, the Blade God assured the boy that once he had taught his disciple everything, he would take over his duties. It was an incredible deal that attracted and tempted Seo Eun Gang. When they finally reached the place of training, the boy was tired and could barely stand. But when the master said that the basic Mugong training was not so difficult, and he would learn quickly, the student gained new strength and motivation. Then, the teacher told him to look at his movements and repeat them. After that, Seo Eun Gang concentrated, trying to forget about his tiredness, and began to watch the master's movements carefully. Under the watchful guidance of the God of Blades, the main stage of training began, and the boy was infinitely grateful for his endurance and relentless effort that had led him to this momentous day. Everything around him seemed interesting and magical. He was experiencing an incredible experience as the God of the Blade began to demonstrate his skills. The sword sliced through the air, releasing lightning, and then the sword returned to the master's hands. However, despite his delight, the boy was shocked, not understanding how to repeat such a sophisticated technique. The student could not understand how it all became so easy for the master. Attempts to repeat the movements seemed futile. The sword did not respond to his call as if it were a stranger. The master began to teach the boy how to feel the sword's energy and call it to him, which required spiritual mastery. It was a school that was especially exciting, the wielding of a spiritual sword, when the sword is not just a tool, but endowed with chakra and chi energy that lifted it to the heavens. After clumsy attempts at apprenticeship in the art of the spiritual sword, the boy and the masters were surprised by his failures. The God of the Blade, who himself had mastered the art at the age of 10, could not understand why the boy was so inept with the sword now, at the age of 11. It seems that his gift of skill is almost fading away, and he feels that he is becoming a mediocrity. Thinking about possible ways to move the sword, his attempts looked quite desperate. He was frustrated by his own failures, and the masters did not know how to help. While discussing his gift, a quarrel broke out between the masters again, calling the boy stupid. But the student, shocked by this, decided not to despair, but rather to turn his disappointment into motivation. He realized that to achieve his goal, he needed to practice, practice, and practice again. Every failure was another step towards success for him. He was stubborn and ready not to give up a single step. And although some of his attempts were better, he remained far from the mastery he was striving to achieve. This day of his training was exhausting. At the end of the training, he was disappointed that he would never be able to learn the skill. Then the teachers agreed among themselves that Moonface would be in charge of awakening the boy from now on. The teacher started teaching without waiting, grabbing the boy and quickly ran to a high mountain. The guy lost his breath and was afraid for his life. He thought they were going to hit a rock and crash. The teacher decided to teach him a lesson, running to the very top of the mountain. He began to hold the boy over the cliff for a while. The boy floundered trying to get out. The moon-faced man stood on the edge of the cliff and calmly spoke about the good that this test would bring to the disciple. But before the boy could comprehend the meaning of his words, the teacher suddenly let go of him, and he felt the teacher moving away from him with extreme speed. Everything in his soul boiled over with fear and anger. How could the teacher make such a terrible joke and throw him ruthlessly off a cliff just for failing to use the spiritual sword? He could believe that this old man had thrown him off a cliff. The boy thought that they would keep throwing him off the cliff like that until he reached enlightenment. The boy's heart almost stopped when he suddenly remembered the phrase written on the mysterious stone about the cruel fate of a student who tries to escape, the loss of 6 senses, and the cutting of a tendon. Suspicion clutched his throat. Could this be the teacher's punishment for his prevented escape? To attract the attention of the masters, the boy screamed so that his voice soared upward with a gunshot. "I wasn't trying to escape," he shouted. "Please save me from this terrible punishment." His words were full of deep desperation and prayer for mercy. He didn't know how to justify himself to the harsh masters, but he had to try everything to save his future. While he was flying down, he was overcome with regret that he could not take revenge on the Sichuan Tang house, and he felt insulted that he would die so early and in such a stupid way. The instinct of self-preservation screamed at him that he did not want to die, that he was scared. But then suddenly the moon-faced one caught him on the way to the ground. It turns out that in this way the teachers tried to awaken his strength, but the boy failed the test and failed it. The teachers were faced with an incredible dilemma. On the one hand, they had to teach him. On the other hand, their resources and patience were at their limit. But their main duty was to be responsible for this boy. Then the teachers seriously thought about how to awaken his strength. It was clear that they could not wait for him to awaken for days on end, so they thought of another way to help him. This fascinating ritual begins with ancient techniques of separation and purification. The master, who has the inner core of power, transfers part of this energy to another, to the main channel of energy. Something extraordinary happens when the body of the one who receives this gifted power becomes sensitive to mastering Mugan. However, such a powerful ritual requires great skill and experience. Even when trying to use this method on a newborn baby, it takes 3 high-ranking masters who are able to transform ordinary time into a powerful flow of energy. From the very beginning, this technique is an incredibly difficult ritual that takes more than a day to complete and may result in side effects. Weakening of the body and mind, as well as a shrinking of the inner core, become a real test of will and resilience. Such a ritual is extremely rare, and its successful completion is a real stroke of luck. Usually, the technique of separation and purification is used on very young children, when their minds and souls are not yet burdened with the burden of adult life. However, the boy is already an adult, and this makes the ritual much more difficult and dangerous. The teachers had no idea how long it would take to perform the ritual, but they had no other option. They had to do it. So they decided that while the preparation for the ritual was going on, Kwandu would be in charge of the student. The guy woke up thinking that he did not want to die. He opened his eyes and could not understand where he was, but suddenly remembered what had happened. He thought he was dead, but he pinched himself and realized he was alive. He began to regain consciousness, and his memories began to clear. Seo Eun Gang had a grudge against the fact that he fainted, and the teachers left him alone in the forest. But what surprised him was that despite everything he had been through, he was not in pain, and it made him feel some relaxation. Then he began to observe carefully the sensations that permeated his body. He felt as if the blood was gradually draining away, leaving a refreshing trail like a stream of spring water. And suddenly, it felt as if his body was filled with energy from the top of his head to his toes. This cold that enveloped him was completely different from the usual frost outside. It was energy that revitalized his body, restoring his strength and recharging his soul. Unusually, he did not feel the burden of fatigue, even despite the previous unsuccessful stage. He thought about the fact that every day since he arrived here, very strange things have been happening. Suddenly, the guy felt a blow to the head and again with a rag. Thus, the teachers told him that he was not doing anything and to run and prepare food. They motivated this by the fact that everything is done for the sake of the student. Feeling indescribable anger, the guy exploded. What kind of ridiculous logic is it to cook food? He started shouting his dissatisfaction. Needless to say, even questions about his health did not escape their lips. The last day was on the verge of his life, and they didn't say a word. And who is he to them? No one. Just a puppet in their hands. And the inventor of this nightmare was the master of Kwandu, who had thrown him off the cliff. The boy demanded forgiveness. As soon as he shouted out the last word, he felt the rag fly at him again. After that, the masters began to explain. They argued that their goal was not to hurt him, but to teach him. He had no skills. He didn't even know how to use a sword. And despite his objections, the masters insisted that he should rely on their wisdom. Again, they made it clear that resistance could cost him dearly, and that risking his life was dangerous, but not forbidden. After that, he was not ordered to take a rag and go to the kitchen without idling. After the delicious meal was prepared, everyone sat down at the table, ready to eat. But in the blink of an eye, the 3 masters skillfully attacked the most delicious pieces of meat. Before Seo Eun Gang could even realize it, there was only one piece of meat left in front of his eyes, and it quickly disappeared. The masters decided to teach him a life lesson. Procrastination can lead to starvation. After that, it was soon time for the next discipline. From now on, he had to get up early in the morning and go to the well to fetch water for everyone. While washing the dishes, he fell into deep thought. It became obvious to him how people's attitudes toward him were changing just because of his failures with the sword. Doubts about his own abilities and potential in martial arts were sown in his mind. Against the backdrop of this internal conflict, he became determined to take revenge on the masters for their punishment and rejection. Suddenly, Master Samumel entered the room. His gaze was so expressive that it seemed as if he was penetrating the boy's very thoughts. He asked him with a light touch if he was feeling deeply disappointed. The answer to this question was heard only in the silence that filled the room. Having decided to reveal some reality, he began to try to convey this difficult truth to the student. He said that not all of his colleagues knew how to communicate with people properly, and he frankly admitted that he himself was not always a master at it either. Nevertheless, he put some hope in the future asking the student to strive not to judge them for this, but instead to consider the possibility of understanding them more. After that, the boy responded with a determination that impressed the master. He refused to be frustrated and complain about the circumstances, and instead acknowledged that he understood the situation. He realized that there were no quick fixes and expressed his willingness to put all his efforts into improving himself. He inwardly abandoned the etiquette of self-blame and instead dared to believe in himself. He felt that he had the potential and determination to quickly master the art of the spiritual sword. Following the ancient principle, if you fail with the first one, try the second or even the third. Meanwhile, he noticed that his feelings about himself had changed dramatically. A sense of confidence gripped him and made him stronger. Now he does not allow his fear of teachers to draw divisions in himself, and turned around and gave the teacher his cup. The teacher perceived a shocking truth. Once upon a time, standing in front of the Sichuan house, shivering from the cold, was Engan, that little child who had now grown into a strong young man. This reflection reminded him that the true nature of the people of that family could be even more dangerous than animals. Surprised and amazed, the teacher refused to believe that they could reduce the child to such a state. He set himself the task of helping the boy by making his own elixir, Temarin, which was sure to have some beneficial effect. The boy passionately considered every word that came out of the mouth of teacher Samu Mel, and his understanding was filled with the truth and sincerity of these words. However, a remarkable goal arose in his mind: to convince the teachers that they were wrong to call him stupid. The boy decided to change the situation by soon mastering the art of the sword, and thus driving out the teachers' doubt and pity. Passing by the teacher's room, his gaze rested on their carefree life, where they seemed lost in eating and sleeping. At that moment, memories of his childhood returned, when his life was just as bright and frivolous. Boldly, he opened the door to the past, and the inner dialogue allowed him to consider the most diverse stages of his journey. However, his goal was not to simply recall. He moved on, keeping in mind what he had come here for. He entered the teacher's room, ready to openly express his thoughts, which told him that the art of the spiritual sword was much more than just a basic technique. When the student asked if the masters considered the spiritual sword technique to be something for beginners, the teachers did not answer. Their silence was so profound that he even began to think they were deaf. Suddenly, however, he felt his body begin to clench hard, like a stone, and he was practically paralyzed. At that moment, fear permeated his every cell. The teachers became indignant that he doubted their teaching technique and decided to show him the spiritual sword technique again. The teacher moved abruptly to the training field, and the boy almost literally chased after him, running up to his chest in the heat of the moment. A light breeze ruffled his hair, and his breathing became increasingly shallow from exertion. He looked at the teacher, wondering how he, with all his muscles and weight, managed to keep up such a fast pace. So he thought that he was really learning from very unusual masters. Suddenly, the boy stumbled and almost fell, but the teacher picked him up. After the master raised 2 fingers to the boy's neck and performed some mysterious action, the boy's voice suddenly went out. The feeling was so amazing, as if he had woken up from a nightmare and found himself unable to get a word out of his mouth. He had a terrible thought that the teacher had done this so that he would fall off the cliff in silence next time. But the teacher told me something unusual. The student's body condition was in complete disarray, and it needed immediate correction. Perhaps this was due to the excessive physical activity he had been forced to do since childhood. Most interestingly, it turned out that every part of the body had its own problems that would need to be treated. However, correcting these problems promised to be very painful. The student was frightened as he listened to the teacher's words about the incredible pain. His heart beat faster with anxiety, especially when the master warned him not to bite his tongue. Then, really unexpectedly, he felt an extremely sharp pain hit his body. It was so intense that he even wondered if the master was really not hurting him. While the guy's bones were being broken, he thought that he had never been beaten like that before and did not understand why they did this to him. Only after the torture ended did the teacher remove the blockage from his voice, and the boy was finally able to speak. Trying to walk, the boy realized that he could not keep his balance, and the teacher advised him to try again. The guy was going to get up again. Each attempt was like an extraordinary dance. And finally, he was able to stand up, feeling his body moving away from the ground. Paradoxically, when he finally stood up, his back was in the best condition possible, as if all the pain had disappeared instantly. It seemed that, despite the external circumstances, he had discovered a new way of seeing the world, somehow even extraordinary. Now, every impression around him seemed completely unexpected and incredible, because he saw it all from a different angle, unexpectedly discovering a world that was far beyond his height. He used to feel tightness and a constant mild headache, but all of that disappeared now. He had a feeling that he was born again. No sooner had the boy begun to master his new sensations than the teacher suddenly called him over. It was like taking off for the clouds after a long time on the ground. Although Seo Eun Gang was initially alien to the transformations in his body, he was surprised to discover how quickly he was adapting to these unusual changes. His body seemed much better, stronger, more elastic. Every movement became smoother, as if he had become part of the wind that was blowing through him. His heart was beating so hard as if it wanted to break out of his chest and get free, and his breath was coming so fast. Although he was slightly out of breath from running, he could feel the fresh air filling his lungs, and each breath was like a pledge of new energy. At that moment, he did not believe that running could be so much fun and exciting. Being carried away by the moment, he came close to the teacher. Unable to contain his emotions, laughter burst out of him as unexpectedly as the joy of successfully achieving a goal. The teacher stood there, bewildered, and unable to understand what was the cause of his mirth. It was the moment when, in the midst of his progress, he finally felt the joy of the process of overcoming obstacles. After that, Master Bidong decided to tell the boy a story that would reveal to him the secret of the master's brilliant path that led him to master the art of the spiritual sword at the age of 10. Sitting down next to the boy, he began a story that would take them both into a world of wonder and adventure. Once upon a time, when Bidong was a beggar, his fate was cast in accordance with his own unlucky line. The constraints of fate forced him to rely on the charity of strangers. However, sometimes life, against all odds, arranges encounters that overcome one's own limits. It all started when one day he came across a man moaning in pain as he limped along the street. Bidong, feeling true compassion, could not leave him. His own compassion brought him to the wounded man, and the conversation led to the discovery of the threat lurking behind the master's secret. This event turned their two fates into one. A man from the Ilshan clan, who had been wounded by the pursuers of another clan, became Bidong's teacher, giving him knowledge and techniques that were incomprehensible and rare to most. And the teacher gave his students silver scrolls and objects. And so, the process of changing the difficult fate of a beggar to that of a swordmaster began. One day, fighters from another clan went to meet them, brazenly demanding payment. The scene where 30 pursuers tried to kill them was full of tension and epic. On the verge of survival, Master Bidong, taking a sword that had never been in his hands before, felt a strong tremor from the weight of the moment. Suddenly, he felt that his destiny was to open up with this sword, to become one with it. The moment the sword first took hold of his hands was a moment of enlightenment. Ki energy permeated his body, and all his senses merged into one. Only thanks to the sword did he have a chance to survive. With confidence and deep determination, he raised his sword, and using the skill of the spiritual sword, he made a striking blow that unfolded before him. The blow struck all the enemies, and the sword floated like a lightning bolt. And, although the teacher was no longer with him, his legacy and spirit lived on in Bidong's every movement. Children have their mentors, but true masters live on in their followers, leaving an imprint of their wisdom and strength. When Master Bidong decided to pass on a special insight to Gang, he wanted to convey that you can connect with the sword at any time, no matter who you are. It was like an extraordinary key piece of information that would open up new horizons. Bidong demonstrated the spiritual sword technique for the second time. His movements were as precise as music, and they created an aura of mystery that filled the air. It is hard to believe, but they were learning to control the power and spiritual harmony in every movement. However, even after Ngang's body regained its integrity, he was unable to repeat the technique shown by the master. It was as if something in him remained blocked, as if his soul refused to obey. It was at this point that the master could not contain his emotions. He bitterly scolded the student for only shouting at the sword, using the spiritual sword technique in vain. The famous teacher was disappointed in Ngang's actions. He demanded more than just physical contact. But the real gem of the text is the boy's inner struggles. He felt as if he would never be able to master this important technique. His thoughts were flying around like crows, capable of crushing his hopes. Was there any hope that he would ever become a true swordsman? His soul was ready to submit, but at that very moment, his teacher seemed to give him a brilliant answer. His voice rang out, breaking the silence. There is nothing simpler than the spiritual sword technique. The teacher would not give up, like a bitter target, reminding the boy of his potential. But this was only the beginning. As you know, mastery has many levels. The teacher determined that it was time to expand the student's horizons by teaching him another secret, energy in the sword, also known as Kanban. The teacher unfolded this technique before the boy's eyes. The scientist's words created a picture where the energy gathered like thin threads, uniting the sword into a single whole. Thus, on the borderline between reality and spirituality, they were united. Like threads of weaving, energy merges into a single stream, the teacher explained. But not only that. Imagine that the sword is your arms, your legs, your heart. You and your sword are one, a single organism. These words pierced the boy, making his breathing deeper. An eternity had passed. But even after an hour of relentlessly training the energy in the sword, it refused to obey, as if denying its own nature. Not only its radiance, but even its faint light was no longer visible. At the end of the day, the teacher recognized that it was time to end the lesson and try again tomorrow, because such a strenuous workload exhausts not only the soul, but also the body. When the student asked hopefully if there was any easier technique than this sword energy, the teacher became indescribably angry. His face shone like fire, and his eyes expressed an inner explosive energy. The moment came when a terrible event occurred that could fill the heart with overwhelming anxiety. The teacher's anger immediately began to create a terrible impact on the space around him, causing vibrations and ruptures that permeated everything. Like a mysterious spell, the scientist's anger stirred up the nature around him, making the space shake violently and crackle with tension. His eyes burned with anger, and his power began to spin out of control. In the midst of this chaos, the disciple shouted, "Calm down, calm down!" trying to calm the growing storm. Feeling the power of the explosion, the earth was splitting in two, and he did not have the ability to put it back together, so he could simply destroy this place to ashes. This amazing symphony of chaos continued until Master Kwandu came running to stop the storm. His hands tried to stop this ugly spectacle. After his actions, as if by magic, the storm began to subside. In the end, everything came back to normal. Nature, which had been screaming so desperately, finally found its voice. And at this moment, when everything calmed down, Master Kwandu pushed out an echoing, noisy breath from his chest. "If everything here falls apart, you will have to take responsibility. After all, Bidong could have reduced this place to ashes." Suddenly, everyone present felt an overwhelming stench spread through the air, squeezing their souls like a cold iron rim. It was the Endan medicine that the Kwandu was preparing. This medicine strongly promised to strengthen the Mugen, which was already putting the audience before an important choice. A huge wave of discussion ensued. The final sayings of the famous masters came to life like modest echoes. Among the discussions, an irrepressible statement arose. The boy was not gifted for fencing. After that, Bidong sent him to Kwandu for training, hoping that his student would learn the technique of fisticuffs from him. And the teacher immediately began teaching fisticuffs. Kwandu demonstrated his ability by lifting a stone the size of a house into the air and then smashing it with a single swing of his fist. This basic technique was called a fist. The teacher saw the student running away from them. It seems that the beginning of the legend was still far away. After the Kwandu training, the boy stood and sadly looked at his battered fist, and his teacher scolded him for not being able to break a small stone. The teachers healed him in 30 minutes, but it was a hellish experience for him. But he decided not to give up prematurely and to practice more to achieve the skill. After all the teacher's quarrels, Gang did not stop fighting with himself. His lonely struggle continued for several hours while the teacher slept sweetly. The masters began to respect the boy's fighting spirit and willpower. The next morning, when the sun rose, Seo Young-gang met with his teacher, Dan-Wu, who ordered him to follow him. From the very beginning, it was obvious that the teacher preferred to act in silence, keeping his motives a secret, and even the boy's chirping could not distract him. From the first step, it became clear to the boy that he was in a really dangerous adventure. The traps set by the master in the mountains showed that they were not going on this journey from scratch. Listening carefully to every step and following exactly the trail left by the teacher, it became clear that a wrong move could lead to fatal consequences. Everything happened suddenly, like a flash of lightning. The boy's foot slipped, and he abruptly lost his orientation. A fog enveloped him, as if a curtain was falling in front of his eyes, but his ears still registered the teacher's voice, which cut through the fog like a call to survival. "Poisonous fog!" His voice broke through, extremely wary, urging him to keep his cool, hold his breath, and move forward with all his might. The boy, with a sigh of relief, pushed off his setback and pushed forward through the gray that stood in his way. His heart was beating as loudly as if it was trying to break free, but he could already feel the fresh rush of air that he breathed in with a full chest. He remembered the past, his courage, perseverance, and endurance that had helped him survive in conditions that were more hell than heaven. After a long journey, they came to the edge of a cliff, and the disciple's eyes shone with the realization that this moment could be critical. His mind began to race, forming plans for escape in case of danger. But the teacher suddenly expressed an intention, that every 3 days the student should climb to the top of the cliff and return back. This news excited the student, but the most interesting part was yet to come. With his hands down, the teacher used his energy, and then the mountains parted, revealing 2 passages, left and right. On their right, through the right cave, they had to go up and then down through the left one. Everything was new to the student, but the teacher helped him to deal with the difficulties for the first time with the help of levitation. Together, they embarked on a successful journey that took them higher and higher step by step. In addition to the height, he could feel the charge of hope in the air, the belief that he would be able to feel freedom again in his own skin. Suddenly, the teacher abruptly stopped walking and began to manipulate the stones, as if by a touch of magic, making them into the mountain he had just walked over. The student's surprise turned to admiration as he realized that this was what made their hiding place impenetrable and invisible. At this time, the master gave one special stone to the disciple, which he considered to be the anti-lie. Now the master knew that this stone would become an ally for the student in the fight against snares and deceptions. With this stone, he could reveal the true images of things in their exact scale and form. He no longer had to worry about the confusion of the path, as this stone would be a kind of compass to the truth. In order not to lose it, it was necessary to memorize the landmarks: a river crossing the forest, a rock resembling a turtle, a tree with a thin trunk, a torn road as if from the post-smallpox era, and trees that looked like grandparents. With this new knowledge and resources, the student felt that his journey had become even more exciting and important. Then the road led them to an ancient well that looked like an ancient connection to the past. The teacher pointed to it, telling them about the special ritual significance of this place. The conversation paused for a moment when he mentioned that every 3 days when he would come here, the student would have to draw water from this well. The teacher suddenly said he would be back and disappeared. The student was left alone, looking at the river flowing nearby. In his mind, he wandered back in time, remembering his own family, and nostalgia for those days arose in his heart. That moment simply reminded him how much he wanted to see them again, to feel the warmth of their embrace and hear the sounds of his home. Deep in his thoughts, he became an orphan, blaming the Tang family of Sichuan, and was deeply determined that anyone with even the slightest connection to the Tangs and their power should be destroyed by his hand. His heart burned with anger, hatred for those he believed were responsible for his captivity. Realizing the need to purify his inner world, he put his head under the stream of the river, trying to wash away the bitterness of his thoughts and anger. The water gently washed over his face, and the wind whispered to him quiet promises of inner peace. However, time passed, and his soul remained not quite balanced. Then the master came, holding a bucket. The teacher explained that from that moment on, he should take water in this bucket. The disciple, in a fit of frustration, voiced his dissatisfaction that this would take up most of his time, which he could have given to perfecting the art of the spiritual sword. In response to his accusations, the teacher gave him an important choice: responsibility for his own destiny and the path of self-development, or the opportunity to leave this place, giving up everything. After some time, a lively discussion broke out among the teachers about the decision to leave the boy alone on the mountain. Their arguments flew around like butterflies, but soon united in a web of common understanding. They no longer had the right to force someone who did not have a natural talent for martial arts to practice them. In this way, they convincingly recognized that free choice is the key to development. Samu Mel, saddened by these events, began to worry seriously about the boy they left at the top. Many traps were waiting there, and he feared that if the boy did not return by nightfall, he would have to go in search of him. But Yun Dan Wu noted that this was a necessary part of his training, to find his way on his own and avoid dangerous traps. Meanwhile, the boy continued to wander up the mountain, looking at the river from a different angle. He realized that when you look at it from the outside, the river looks ordinary and inconspicuous, but only when you dive into its waters does its true power reveal itself. Despite the fact that his teachers were constantly scolding him and bothering him, he realized that he was taking decisive steps forward, not backing down in the face of challenges and problems. This willpower reminded him of a powerful stream of river water, always filled with opportunities and prospects. Keeping in mind his past hatred, regret, and pain, he decided to use these emotions as a motor for his growth. This was his driving force, his fuel, which was to make his way to the exit. When the sun disappeared behind the horizon, the teachers began to think. They wondered if it was possible that Engon had already broken free and left their shelter. This caused them to doubt whether they had really created such a good place for him as they thought. Still, they were harsh and displeased with him, occasionally ridiculing and scolding him. Suddenly, the door opened. The teachers thought that someone had been careless and left the door open, but were surprised to find that it was the student who had returned, carrying 2 buckets full of water on his shoulders. Engon understood the deep meaning of this task. He was doing it for those who had long since watched him from the heights of heaven, for his father, mother, and sister, whose souls remained in the world. This thought filled him with courage and determination. But when he tried to put down the bucket at the entrance, his strength left him, and he fell down. The teachers, reassured by his efforts, decided to approach the boy with more understanding. They began to praise his character and strength, even saying that the water he brought was incredibly delicious, like a divine drink. Then they took him to dinner, where he was in for another pleasant surprise, a delicious and nourishing meal that gave him strength. The teachers were discussing an important question, whether to use the complicated technique of separation and purification for an 11-year-old boy to help him achieve Mugon. It was a really difficult dilemma, especially for someone of that age. The technique was important, but its application required special skills that not every master could master. Master Bidong had already tried to apply this technique to Engan once, but the result was unfavorable. The teacher recalled how he felt that the innate energy began to interact with the boy's body, trying to heal him. This experience showed that the boy had the potential to restore himself if given the chance. After all, innate energy is the power that people receive at the beginning of their lives from their parents. It is an integral part of every person's vitality. But unfortunately, the influence of the outside world gradually dissipates this energy, and when it runs its course, a person leaves this world. There is no way to replenish innate energy, but if you combine it with the energy of Ki, the inner life force, you can maintain balance and overcome challenges. Thus, teachers could not understand how a student uses innate energy. Innate energy can enhance the effectiveness of Ki energy, but without Ki energy, it is useless, only affecting the health and endurance of the body. Teachers, although they had great knowledge, grew up in an environment where they became masters in practice without deeply studying the scientific foundations. And this feature of their training influenced their manner of teaching the younger generation, including Engon. However, the day will come when the student will determine his own path and how much he is able to overcome the trials that the masters of the past generations went through. The teachers decided to make an attempt to multiply the energy of Ki in the student, believing that this can help him overcome the challenges that await him. And they realize that if this plan fails, then the student Engon will have to find his own unique path, which may differ from the paths taken by the masters. Amidst the crowd of opinions and plans, the teachers face a difficult choice. They feel that they have to keep the Ki energy alive in the student because it can be crucial to reaching the highest light. The last path is the most difficult test and the most important of all. It may be the key to the enlightenment they all seek. It is here that life and death, knowledge and oblivion, strength and vulnerability are intertwined. Moonface, the master, made his own confession, hinting that even before Engon's arrival, he had begun preparing the mysterious elixir Temarin, intended for the person who would become a disciple, and so they decided to do the unthinkable. To give the student the elixir while he was still unconscious, so that his taste horizon would not detect the terrible bitterness, because it is known that the worse the taste, the better its effect can be. Even in great deeds, sometimes a hidden unpleasantness helps to achieve great results. Unfortunately, surprises don't always work out as planned. After drinking the elixir, the boy suddenly woke up, disrupting the unplanned moment. The teachers immediately tried to take control of the situation, trying to put him back into a deep sleep. They used their own energy to put him back into a trance. The use of the master's energy left a mark on the student, and he fell back into hibernation. In the course of events, it became known that Engon was unable to control the flow of Ki energy, which began to be produced rapidly as a result of the elixir. The masters found that he needed their help to regulate this process, and they were by his side and managed the energy for the next hour, ensuring his safety and comfort. The next day, the student was surprised. convinced that the previous day was just an incomprehensible nightmare. Feeling the non-verbal breath of time on his neck, he decided that it was time to stop wasting time and start studying for real. And so, a non-stop cavalcade of training began. Days and weeks intertwined, as if merged into one big stream. The guy immersed himself in what he was doing so deeply that time dissolved in the rhythm of his inspiration, and 3 months passed incredibly quickly, like one day passing by. But suddenly, voices came from far away, thin and deep, like the wind carrying the secrets of the past. The elders, for some unknown reason, decided to visit this place. The masters were irritated, because their relationship with the previous generation was, to put it mildly, tense. Determined to understand this unusual situation, Bidong went to meet the guests. There were too many mysterious guests, and the atmosphere was filled with tension. They were visited by the Amashin clan, who had been carrying mystery and respect for decades. It was the largest of the 9 Yunpa clans, composed exclusively of female martial artists. Among the visitors were individuals who carried power and ancient wisdom. Their names echoed in the depths of my memories. Seo Eun Gang, whose gaze was so deep that one could get lost in its mysteries. Hua Yu-sang, who radiated an energy of purity. Bong Chul-guk, the younger student of Elderman Cheon, who was literally surrounded by an aura of power. Lim Yu-sak, the great-grandson of Elder Cheon Su, who exuded calm wisdom. Hek Ren Moon, the only student of Elder Kam Sung, with a look of mystery in his eyes. In addition, the 3 Un-che masters, Man Cheon. All of this created an incredible atmosphere of mystery, ancient rituals, and knowledge that transcended time. Kam Pen Ak, the senior master, had just come to the mountaintop to meet his unusual guests. At the beginning of the meeting, words of gratitude and respect sounded among the 3 masters, Un-cha and his colleagues, like a melody of coordinated rhythms. When the moment of the meeting reached its climax, Kam Pen Ak began to descend the mountain. His guests, the masters of Un-chea, took to the sky with an impressive start, like birds spreading their wings under the first rays of the morning sun. Rattling with a light rustle, they hover in the air, demonstrating their supreme skill. Radiating strength and grace, they practically dance in the heavenly heights. The students, amazed and delighted, watched this spectacle, realizing their dreams of mastering such a magical technique. After a moment of contemplation of the breathtaking scenery, the guests began to inquire about the details of the story that brought them here. Together, the students invited Eun Gang, whom they called their great interlocutor, to join the circle. Seo Eun Gang revealed himself to the guests as a young man who grew up in the embodiment of great masters, close friends of the elders' teachers. In response to their expressions of admiration and reverence, he got to know each of them individually, creating a bond that would seem to have been known for a long time. A sense of camaraderie filled the air, reflecting the true essence of martial arts. The young students could not contain their enthusiasm, talking about how their skills were blossoming and how they felt connected to the world around them. Meanwhile, Eun Gang was preoccupied with one thought: how much rice should he cook for the company? It was only then that the youngest of the guests, Hua Yu-sang, decided to take the initiative and meet Eun Gang in person. Her determination was reflected in the quick questions she asked, as if trying to catch every moment of the life of a young man who had managed to become a student of such outstanding masters. Another student could not contain her enthusiasm and admitted that she had heard unexplored legends about the 3 teachers. She was so impressed with their skills. The student knew that each of the 3 gods of the blade, the fist warriors, and the divine eyes not only succeeded their teacher, but surpassed them, reaching a new level of mastery. This combination of greatness and modesty was rare in the world of martial arts. What is even more impressive is that Yang Han chose to learn from all 3 teachers. This aroused curiosity not only among the students, but also among the masters, who were looking for an answer to the question of what made him special in choosing such an extraordinary path of study. Standing in front of these children, Yang Han felt confused. The answer to their questions did not seem as simple as it seemed at first glance. He walked a fine line between telling the truth and keeping his story a secret. The 3 heavenly dragons, led by Hek Ren Mun, interjected themselves into the conversation, indicating that the boy should show them the place. His heart was struggling with the desire to reveal secrets to them, but he was afraid that this would lead to unpredictable consequences. The students began to joke and be rude when they saw that Eun Gang was silent. His determination to refuse to reveal the secret was even stronger. He told them that his teacher was currently training and he could not deviate from the assignment he had received. Then the girl, who was always ready to talk, began to question Engan about his choice to train with the sword god. The young man decided to put the story to rest by telling her about his study of spiritual sword techniques, which play an important role in martial arts and spiritual growth. The conversation in the group quieted down, and the expressions on the guests' faces turned to bewilderment. But Hae-ryong Moon, the only one who was having fun with the situation, began to laugh. He even challenged Yoon-gun to a sword fight while the masters continued to talk. It seemed that he had always wanted to test his strength against someone with spiritual sword skills. Hwa Yu-sung stepped in, calling for calm and an end to the argument. The other girl added that the duel should take place with the consent of both parties, and such an imposition was not in keeping with the spirit of friendship and understanding. But the boys continued to doubt Yoon-gun's abilities and mock him, asking inappropriate questions about his training and skills. Immediately after the boys' disrespect for the three teachers, Yoon-gang felt an inner anger and determination, and responded to the challenge by choosing a big battle as a way to establish his reputation. His reaction to the provocation was unexpected. He took the challenge on himself, realizing that in doing so, he could teach others to respect his teachers. Engan already saw the conflict coming, and realized that this was the time to take the high ground. In the moment of battle, Engan faced a bold challenge from the enemy. Although the spiritual sword technique was new to him, he decided to try to use it in battle. The swords in the hands of the opponents glistened in the sun as they began to circle each other, avoiding a collision. Engan was looking for an opportunity to apply his new skills and advantages in battle. But even when he failed to successfully execute the spiritual sword technique, he did not put down his sword and give up. The opponent, having beaten him back with his sword, laughed at him, turned around and was ready to retreat. Anger and determination filled the disciple of the sword god as he called his opponent to end the battle. His voice is brave and confident, emphasizing his unwavering will. "All is not lost," he said, knowing that this was an important moment. He did not want to give in to malicious words and provocations, because he felt that anger could push him to unpredictable ends. The boy's words left their mark, because the second brave guest took up the challenge and ran at him. In his excitement, he charged at the boy like a bull in an arena, determined to take revenge. He pounced on Seo Eun Gang and began to beat him brutally. His thirst for victory was boundless. He started the fight with a different energy, deciding to give everything to deal with his enemy. After the battle, he realized that the spiritual sword is more important than just fighting skills. Failure to defend the people he cared about led Engan to reflect on the true nature of his training. His faith in the spiritual sword began to seek a deeper understanding. Suddenly, one of the girls boldly intervened, trying to pull the guest away from our hero. Her words of prudence and peacemaking sounded extremely desperate in this tense atmosphere. Yoon-gun could feel his heart beating in time with the moment, trying to sort out his emotions. Feeling the power born deep inside him, he picked up his sword and made a sharp swing. His movement was precise and ruthless, and the guest's ear flew in the air, changing the feeling of battle. The guest's screams echoed around him, which only increased the tension. Engan could see that guy writhing in pain, but his anger knew no bounds. He vowed to take revenge for his ear. But at that moment, the second boy of the three celestial dragons intervened, knocking the sword away from Engan. The spiritual sword technique was a real miracle. It was reflected in the sword's turn and intensified the fight. Memories of what happened in the clearing began to spread among the animals and birds. The story of the spiritual sword technique was passed on, but many had difficulty imagining who Engan was. The attack of the guest with the lost ear was like an explosion of anger. And although it threatened to be a fight, there was a chance that the fate of this duel would determine more than just the winner. Meanwhile, the elders were wondering if the time might come for them to work together. The calm suggestion of the guests broke through the pauses. They wanted to stop hiding and join their efforts, but the masters remained true to their path. The silence of one of the masters was broken by the unbearable audacity of the city noise. He went out to find out what was going on, and his absence attracted the attention of the others. What was unfolding on the street was incredible. They saw a fight, and it angered the elders with extraordinary force. They chased after the disciples, trying to reconcile them. Engan was lying unconscious from the unforeseen conflict. The master carefully checked his condition, and the other disciples told their versions of the incident. The old man's heart throbbed with anger when he saw what his disciples had done. He hit the disobedient boy with anger in his eyes, calling him an idiot. Suddenly, sounding like a menacing command, he demanded that the disciples kneel before the three masters and apologize. The fierce aces could feel the fire of anger burning in their hearts. Simple words of apology seemed to them too primitive to make up for the deep offenses they had committed against these masters. Suddenly, one of the masters began to manifest great power. The ground around him began to crack, and this energy literally trembled in the air. An unpredictable dance began under the feet of the guest students. The ground shook, and their throats turned into deniers. Fear caught them by the throat, and it became almost impossible to breathe. Responding to the challenge, the masters told the guests that they had to behave like real masters. These were the rules of worthy teachers, those who had completed their journey. But the aces did not allow themselves to be led astray, claiming that they would not be able to forget their indignation so easily. In response, the masters emphasized that the elders had hardly taught their students who they were and what they could do. Then the god of the sword revealed his anger, shouting with all his might that the elders should not consider them equal just because the door of their house had been opened. Darkness enveloped them. Lightning shone in the sky, and the ground under their feet rattled with anger. The real battle took place in their hearts and souls, where vengefulness was growing stronger. But after all this storm, the master guests finally decided to give in and apologized. Responding to this proposal, the aces stubbornly asserted that they would not allow themselves to be treated in this way. They explicitly stated that they would not tolerate impunity for the disciple and their treatment of him. Their patience had its limits, and they suggested that the elders settle the matter through a duel where their will would be revealed with their cards open. The guests' students could not make a single move, but their fear went to a higher level when they realized that this incredible situation threatened their lives. And in this fright, they began to humbly apologize, humbly admitting their mistake in front of such great masters. Although Moonface was ready to give the young people a chance, he did not give them his full trust. He felt that their words, colored by the blue sky, lacked sincerity. Believing in the wisdom of experience, he began to gradually teach these young children reason. This responsibility created terror in them, and although they called on their teachers for help, they faced the silent insistence of the ace, who was unwavering in his intentions. At an abrupt moment, Yoon-gang stood up, demanding that the whole argument stop. He spoke in a quiet but confident voice, explaining that although these children had indeed offended him, he did not want his teachers to stoop to their level because of it. He convinced them that this did not mean forgiveness, but that he would personally punish them in the future when he was able to do so. Making a promise that in 5 years he would defeat these three, he paid tribute to heaven and earth, invoking his great goal. His teachers, listening attentively to his words, listened to his request and dispelled the demonic energy that had engulfed the place. The earth returned to its place, and nature spoke again in peace. The aces, now realizing that their actions had caused not only anger, but also a sense of helplessness and frustration, ordered the guests to leave the place, emphasizing that they were no longer welcome. 8 guests left, loaded. Paying attention to the condition of their student, the teachers noticed that, in addition to painful beatings, he showed signs of cerebral hemorrhage. Obviously, the effect of the Tamarin elixir was not effective in this case, as such complications are not part of its usual spectrum of action. Seo Eun Gang had not yet mastered the spiritual sword technique, but he had already managed to hit the fighting rhythm of the battle. His rage knew no bounds, and he turned it into energy. Knowing that the mastery of the spiritual sword will be revealed only when the sword and body become one, Engan felt an inner pressure to achieve this harmony. Therefore, he was very careful to take care of his physical condition so as not to expose it to exhaustion. Even in this immature state, Yoon-gang did not stop. He capitalized on his own inspiration to use a technique that resembled telekinesis, perfecting it through willpower. The anger added to this cocktail activated Yong-han's inner reserves, merged with his brain activity, and this inner strength allowed him to go beyond his usual limitations and learn this specific skill. But this specific skill was out of reach for most, because its ability is passed down from one born to another. In the paradox of this situation, the skill was present, but Yong-han was not born with the ability to fully control this power. This led to serious complications in his brain, which became a real challenge. Damaging the brain is like walking to the very edge between life and death, where every step requires extreme curiosity. At first, it is important to provide him with emergency medical care, which can be decisive on this path. But even after that, there are no guarantees for a full recovery, and a shadow of uncertainty hangs over the possible outcome. Therefore, the best option is to continue to make efforts to cure him and monitor his health, hoping for the best. After making the unfortunate mistake of letting uninvited guests into their home, the teachers realized the enormous negative consequence. Realizing that Engen might not recover from such an event, they faced an extremely important choice: to kill the perpetrators or to look for ways to save him. With great dedication, they went in search of medicinal herbs that could help in the boy's recovery. Desperately, they tried their best, devising every possible way to help Seo Young-gang return to normal. Healing needles were inserted into the injured body, and their prayers echoed around, asking for the boy's recovery. Thank you all for watching. Put like, subscribe to the channel if you liked the video. Write in the comments which manhwa to retell more.